Welcome to Cogito Design, the video series where we take a deep dive into the world of tabletop game creation. In part 1 we looked at the origin of the game Monopoly, as well as Lizzie Magie's story. In part 2 we're going to take a deeper look into the history behind this influential game. Enjoy! Earlier, we discovered that Monopoly is actually a plagiarised version of the Landlords game designed by Lizzie Magie at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. However, for various reasons, the accolades and rewards of creating the game instead went to a man named Charles Darrow, and Lizzie Magie was forgotten. That was until 1974, when the Parker brothers sued a San Francisco-based professor and game designer named Ralph Anspach. He had created a game he named Anti-Monopoly, aiming to subvert the promotion of monopolies that he felt was present in the Parker brothers' most famous game. They in turn demanded Anspach stop using the name Monopoly in his product. Anspach was not going to go down without a fight, and so he did some digging. It was he that rediscovered Lizzie Magie's original game, and he convinced Darrow's old friend Charles Todd to testify in his defence, telling the court the story of how he taught Darrow the game. Todd had some even more damning evidence. If you remember, Darrow had asked Todd to write him up a copy of the rules to the game. As Todd was writing up these rules, he misspelt one of the place names. Marvin Gardens became Marvin Gardens. That misspelling persists in Monopoly to this very day. If you're a little confused as to what I mean here, the original game was set in Atlantic City, but international versions of the game have different locations. Anspach would eventually win the court case, but it dragged on for 10 long years. There is another tangent here to briefly explore. It is worth noting that legally you can't patent game mechanics, and as designers we really want this to remain true. Just think about the consequences if this weren't the case. Only one company could make deck building games. Or if we think about video games, Wolfenstein would have been the only first-person shooter ever made. We want designers to learn from each other and to build and connect their ideas together in new and interesting ways. Indeed, it is unlikely, given her political beliefs, that Lizzie Magie would have wanted to have created monopolies of mechanics that stifle creativity. That is not the injustice in this story. There may be a fine line between inspiration and theft, but it does not seem that Darrow falls on the right side of this line. While he did change the name and create original artwork for the game, did he change enough to deserve his massive royalties? Well, let's have a look at the game board and see. This is the Landlords game, and this is Monopoly. We have a roll and move game on a board which you continually circle. The theme is the same, the end goal of the game is the same. In both games there is a jail. You gain wages each time you move around the board, and you can also buy and rent property. Okay, I think it's clear, Monopoly is not a clever remix of Lizzie's game mechanics in a new and fresh way. It hasn't even been re-themed. It's basically the same exact game with the underlying political message hidden away. And here's something no one else has mentioned. Did Lizzie Magie also invent legacy games? Ultimately, it's hard not to feel sorry for Lizzie when hearing her story. She dedicated her life to trying to protect those who have had their fruits of their labour taken from them by an unfair system, and she ended up having the exact same thing happen to her. As author and fellow Lizzie fan Mary Palan puts it, it's hard not to wonder how many other unearthed histories are still out there. Stories belonging to lost Lizzie Magies, who quietly chip away at creating pieces of the world, their contributions so seamless that few of us ever stop to think about their origins. Indeed, this history makes it ironic that in Cuba, Soviet Russia and many Eastern Bloc countries, Monopoly was banned for fears it would give people positive notions of the free market economy. In fact, many relatively unsuccessful variants of the game were created in opposition to this behemoth, attempting to highlight the virtues of frugality and equity. This monopoly prohibition did not lift in Russia until 1987, but but it was never truly successful, and throughout the preceding years there was a healthy black market in copies of the game, a useful tool to while away the years of Soviet drudgery. So that is the origin story of Monopoly. But as we know, the history doesn't end there. The game went from strength to strength over the following decades, gracing tables and creating arguments across the globe. It even played a role in defeating Nazism during World War II. In the 1940s, the British version of Monopoly was licensed by John Waddington Limited, which also just happened to be the company which was best in the country at one specific skill: printing elaborate images onto silk. They had mastered this art while making delicate theatre programmes for the elite British royal events. The British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, were well aware of the benefits of printing maps onto silk for military personnel. Silk maps are small and waterproof. They are silent when hidden away in a hurry, and more robust and tear-resistant than paper. They are also thin enough to be hidden inside of a thin piece of card, or a game board. Monopoly itself was the perfect disguise for the sort of tools an escaping prisoner of war might need. Real money could be hidden under the fake Monopoly notes. The metal cast figurines could be replaced with compasses and metal files. It was also possible to get the game into prisoner of war camps with relatively little scrutiny. Particularly towards the end of the war, the Germans were struggling to get enough food for their own troops, let alone their prisoners, and so care packages from the Allies were a convenient solution to this. Monopoly, being well known throughout Europe at the time, was seen as a good way to keep prisoners occupied for hours at a time on things other than escape. The game does indeed take hours. These special escape editions of the game could be recognised by a tiny red dot printed onto the free parking space of the board. A simple printing error to a Nazi guard, but a get-out-of-jail-free card to a British Royal Airman. Throughout the whole war, it was estimated that around 10,000 British prisoners of war used a Monopoly map in a bid for freedom. Hasbro themselves even commented on this history.
Since Charles Darrow created Monopoly in the 1930s,
Moving on.
the game has had a rich and interesting story. The use of Monopoly by the British government to sneak maps, money and supplies to prisoners of war during World War II is a little known but important part of our history.
To be totally honest, taking military advantage of humanitarian aid may seem a little ethically suspect for the Allies to do, but given the context of World War II, this is maybe a little more of a grey area. A final part of the remarkable history of this game we'll share with you is the story of Mr. Monopoly himself, or to be more accurate, Rich Uncle Pennybags, as he was officially named in 1946 when he appeared in another Parker Brothers board game entitled Rich Uncle. This mustachioed multi-millionaire was penned by artist Dan Fox and appeared on the Chance and Community chess cards from 1936 in the US editions of the game. Allegedly, he is based on American financier and banking giant John Pierpont Morgan. Since then, his iconic face has appeared in the second O of nearly every one of the 275 million copies of the game, as well as in several congressional and Senate hearings, occasionally looking a little nervous. So here's a question. Picture the Monopoly man in your mind. Is he wearing a monocle? The answer is no. However, if you thought yes, you are not alone. Despite many people seeming to remember otherwise, he does not in fact ever wear a monocle. There are a huge number of people who seem to remember otherwise, in another case of what has become known to the internet as the Mandela effect. Conspiracy theorists claim this is proof of the existence of alternate realities, but that particular tangent is not one we'll be diving into in this video. Thanks so much for watching this video, we really hope you enjoyed it. Cogito Design is a pretty new channel, and so if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to show your support. It would be very much appreciated. This week we have been absolutely blown away. We genuinely are so thankful. We now have 3 patrons. Thank you so much for your contributions. A massive shout out to Abdulaziz, Kate and Matthew. We really appreciate your support. If you also are liking our content, please check out our Patreon page. It's linked below, and consider donating to support our channel. Thank you. Coming up in part 3, we're going to be looking at the mechanics of the game itself, seeing what works and what doesn't, ultimately exploring why so many people in this hobby hate Monopoly with such a fiery passion.